Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Tyler Adolfo, and in this video, I'm going to talk about a topic that is extremely close to my heart, and that is about my lived experiences with bipolar disorder and specifically how I live well with having bipolar disorder. I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, type 1 with psychotic features. I've had this diagnosis for a few years now, and I'm honestly quite confident that I've probably felt the effects of this condition much longer than that. When I look back to my high school and even some middle school experiences, I can see what appear to be episodes almost in a sense, but not on the scale that I experienced when I was in college and formally diagnosed. I only mention that because I really want to stress how long I've been dealing with this condition. I'm 27 years old now. Um, I experienced a great deal of delusions during a 6 month manic episode when I was in college during my junior year. I was living in a social fraternity party house at the time, and I was kind of overwhelming myself. I had a lot going on, and things were going incredibly well. And that's another thing is that, I've dealt with the highs, I've dealt with the lows, and through both, I've developed my own mechanisms for trying to reduce stressors and to try to find balance and peace. And finding balance, I think, is truly of critical importance because in my case, I was overwhelming myself. I was putting too great a burden on my shoulders, something that's unreasonable for a person to do. One of the things I've been doing since high school is keeping little task lists where I create issues outstanding and I write down tasks that I want to achieve. It really helps me feel grounded, it helps me stay organized, and it helps me stick to a routine. In college, however, during my junior year in particular, I got a little crazy with the things I was listing. The things I was listing became increasingly more numerous, increasingly more difficult, whereas before they were things that were attainable and reasonable. Like, make a social media post on the fraternity page about Rush Week coming up, or, you know, get a score of 90 or above on this test in this class coming up, walk 15,000 steps today. All reasonable, attainable goals for someone who was in my situation. However, the goals I was listing now weren't reasonable. I was coming up with goals like, get in a newspaper, which in itself is like, it's so broad, it's so vague, like get in a newspaper for what? And I would try to organize fundraisers and philanthropy events through my fraternity so that I could try to get in a newspaper. And there were many hours poured into that, and it was incredibly unhealthy. And I actually did end up in a newspaper at one point, and I don't say that to say that you should do this or have that as a goal. It's no, my point is that I think this was one of the triggers for my manic episode. I got in the New York Times in an article that was delving into protests against fraternities across the country. And in it, there's about one paragraph which talks about a fundraiser I did for raising awareness about sexual assault and raising funds for sexual assault victims organizations like Futures Without Violence and End Rape on Campus. And I was very proud of that fundraiser. And getting in the newspaper, though, was probably the worst thing that could happen to me. Because in a way, it confirmed a delusion of grandeur. It substantiated something in myself and ignited a fire that I could later not put out. At one point, while organizing that fundraiser, I was awake for 5 days. And that's not an exaggeration. It's not like, I slept poor last night. It's like I've been awake for 5 days. No, I was awake for 5 days. I went 5 days without sleep. And you should never sleep on the importance of sleep, whether you have a mental illness or not. But I mean, with bipolar disorder, it's a severe mood disorder, and having a good night's sleep is so critical to navigating day to day life and maintaining a stable mood. And I was awake for that long of a time period. So that's why I say it was one of the triggers. And so, looking back, is it okay to be ambitious? Absolutely. Is it, okay to have high standards for yourself? Of course. But you don't want to overwhelm yourself. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you don't have the time to achieve what you've set out to achieve, because under those circumstances, you'll ultimately set yourself up for failure, just as I did. I only mentioned just one of the issues outstanding that I did while I was manic, getting a newspaper, but there were so many more. I would create lists that eventually became 40 lines long, 40 things that I would set out for myself to achieve in a day. Did it happen? No. I talked about one example of it happening, of it getting achieved, at what cost, that's another discussion. But the vast majority of the things I listed would not get done because there just isn't enough time in the day to do that much stuff. I'm one person. At the end of the day, I'm one person. I'm human. I'm not perfect. And neglecting my sleep was one of the worst things I could have done. And so, as I'm making plans to return to college now, it's been a few years since this episode, I'm taking a deeper, closer look at time management. How I devote my time to individual tasks, and what individual tasks do I delineate for myself. Because I don't want to put myself in a position where I overwhelm myself again. So I'm not going to return to school and take 10 courses right away. I'm going to do something reasonable, like 4 courses, and I'm going to set the goal of acing those 4 courses, and that's a reasonable, attainable goal. I've done it in the past. I can do it again. And as time goes on, and I get used to and accustomed to college again, maybe the semester after I could do 5 courses, but the point is, I'm not going to overwhelm myself. I know what my abilities are. I know my capabilities. I know the amount of stress that I can and can't handle. And if I get in a position where I feel like I am feeling too much stress despite the modifications that I made, then it's time to make more modifications. Time to speak to an advisor or, be an advocate for myself and not allow this to happen again. Because that 6-month manic episode was a nightmare. And I don't want to trigger another manic episode. There was nothing productive about my manic episode. It was incredibly destructive. The consequences were numerous. Those consequences I feel to this day. But I've also had to learn to battle bipolar disorder through the lows, the depressive episodes. A lot of people might dismiss depression as just this thing that, everybody experiences depression. It's normal. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But it's not normal to not be able to get out of your bed because of how depressed you are. It's not normal to experience suicidal thoughts because of how depressed you are. And it's not normal to completely surrender hope and think that you're incapable of achieving what you aspire to achieve. And that's what happens to me when I'm depressed. I'm sure I'm not alone in that feeling. But I had a depressive episode that lasted years. My 6-month-long manic episode was certainly long, but my depressive episode was much, much longer. During my depressive episode, I experienced a great deal of negative self-talk that kept me awake at night, and once again, came at a cost of my sleep. I thought about the embarrassing things I did during mania. Why did I say this? Why did I do that? And now I was thinking about it from the perspective of someone who, is rational and, has control of a central command center again. But at the same time, I was in a position where I felt like my life was over. So I wasn't rational in that sense. I felt like there was truly no hope, that there was no pushing forward. And night after night, I would have this negative self talk. I think time was the biggest healer for me in this matter, along with medications. Time was a huge healer because it allowed me to create distance between myself and the traumas that I was confronted with. It empowered me to focus more on the present and my present condition. As time went on, I gradually became more interested in the things that used to interest me. My anhedonia diminished, and eventually I could say today that it's pretty much gone altogether. I'm not depressed to the point where I can't do the things I enjoy, and I'm very grateful for that. And I know there's a lot of people who don't have that, and so I'm not saying that in a way to like brag or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's a milestone. It's an indicator of how far I've come compared to where I once was. And having that perspective is so, so, so important. Having a positive perspective. And small steps add up to become big steps. Small changes add up to become big changes. So at the early stages of my depressive episode, I kind of started the task list thing again. But I didn't do it like overkill like I did before. I started off with simple things that were within my ability given my present condition, like cook a meal. And, that would get me thinking positive, like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this meal, and, what seasonings should I put on it, and maybe I could watch or listen to a podcast while I do it. It created a distraction from the trauma. Distractions aren't always a bad thing. The other thing I mentioned was medication. For me, medication was paramount. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. I'm just a person with bipolar disorder sharing my experience. And in my experience, starting treatment in the form of medications was a game changer. Now, it took a while to find the right medication cocktail. Originally, the first drug I got put on, it actually worked in the sense that it pulled me out of mania right away. But once I was out of mania, I needed any more, and I got put on different drugs, ones to help with depression and to maintain my mood, and antipsychotics. And currently I take a 4 medication combo that works really well for me. And it took a while to find that perfect combo. And when I say perfect, I mean in the sense that, I'm not putting on any more weight, because weight gain was a huge thing that happened, no pun intended, when I started medications. And it doesn't affect my focus. I can read for hours and hours. I could play video games for hours and hours. I could stay focused on a podcast for hours and hours. So it doesn't impair my focus. That's another huge important thing to me. And for yourself, you might value other things and think on your own terms what things you don't want it to affect. But for me, it's been highly beneficial. The pros disproportionately outweigh the cons, and I really can't think of any cons. I guess the only con would be that sometimes the pills for a certain drug could be large or have a funny smell to them, but it's literally 15 seconds of my day taking them, and it's a game changer that allows me to get out of bed, that allows me to go to the gym, that allows me, I worked successfully for quite a while. I worked for 7 months straight, which is insane to me, given the circumstances that I was facing and given where I was. Now, I'm not working now, and I explained in another video why. I'm also going to be returning to school soon. I would not be able to do that without medications. I would still be in an incredibly low, dark place, engulfed in negative self-talk. And I don't want to go back to that place. Another thing that I've really come to learn in living with bipolar disorder is life is not linear. It's different for all of us. Just because someone else achieved X in X amount of time or whatever, it doesn't mean you have to do the same. We're all following our own path. And our paths can change based on what happens to us. It certainly changed for me. My original path was to finish my college education at UMass Amherst and then ideally go to law school. But that's not my path anymore. I unfortunately have been unsuccessful in getting UMass Amherst to overturn my expulsion. So one avenue I could take, one approach, one mindset I could take towards this is, oh, well, that's it. I'm done. UMass won't take me. I'm a bad person, and I'll never be able to get that degree. Or you say, you know what? There's thousands and thousands of colleges out there, other options, ones that will take me. And, I'm nervous about doing it in person again. Well, then I can do it online. And in doing it online, I could save lots of money, and lots of studies have shown that online is just as effective as in person, so long as the person is, disciplined and can stay committed to what they're doing. So I'm not worried about getting a lower quality education. And I think that during COVID, a lot of people's perspective changed on the value of technology and using different platforms and mediums to communicate information. It's not like it once was. And so I plan on returning to college very soon as this summer. Now, a couple months from now, things might be different, and I might say, you know what, I want a little bit of extra time, I'm going to wait till fall. That's all right. But I've been applying to a couple online schools, and I'll share the results on that in a video when I feel like it's appropriate to. But, my point is just that we don't got to follow this one path. There's other paths that branch out that we can take. And my path was certainly altered by the fact that I had that manic episode. And that's okay, because these other paths will get me to my same goal. I could finish my degree online, and then I could apply to law school. Simple as that. And with less debt. And that's important to me because law school is going to come with a requirement that I take out lots of loans. And so any amount that I can reduce is a winner in my book. A win-win situation. The last thing is life is not a one-size-fit-all experience. I've found my path. I want to become a lawyer. I want to represent people. I want to fight for the truth. I want to be a voice and representative for those who are disadvantaged or downtrodden. And I want to give people a fair opportunity to make their own case no matter what the situation is. That's important to me. It's important to me that there's an equitable experience for everybody. Everybody should be dealt with fairly. And I think that's why I'm so inclined to go into law, is because I can make a difference. And someone who's had my lived experiences and made it to the other side, I think would be so beneficial to the potential clients that I may have someday. Because I would be speaking not just as a student who studied law for 3 years, but I would be speaking as a person with a severe but managed mental illness, someone who overcame massive obstacles, someone who did not follow a linear path, someone who had to make small changes and take small steps to make big changes and take big steps. That's key. And that was the topic of this video, was all about living well with bipolar disorder. I wanted to, just talk about my lived experience and talk about what I've done, how far I've come, and what I'm looking forward to. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found this video interesting. If you have any topic suggestions, feel free to list them down below or put them in the comment section. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. My name is Tyler Adolfo. Love you all. Peace, love, and tranquility to all.